person. Ask anyone who knows me. I'm mean and bitter and a failure at everything that I say I believe. I'm not a good person. Ask anyone who loves me. I never write, I never call, I never think about anyone at all.
And welcome to The Bookcase Behind Me, the only podcast giving you actual Lutheran theology and also some information on other denominations as well as we can. I am your host, Pastor Brandon Warr, pastor of St. Patrick Lutheran Church in Chipley, Florida. Joined as always to my proverbial left, the fabulous Filipino Reverend Warr and Alvarez of St. Mary's Evangelical Lutheran Church in the Philippines. How you doing, sir?
Hi, everyone. It's been a great week, and we just had our Ascension Day service this Thursday. This Thursday. I'm very happy about that, even though everybody was looking at us weird, because most people here are Roman Catholic, and they tend to celebrate that on Sunday. So, for them, Jesus stayed a little bit more. So, so there you go.
It was a 40,
A lot of kids were there,
44
too.
days instead of 40? Is that what it comes out to, 43 days?
Yeah, they always move it to the Sunday because that's when most of the people are. So, people are like, why are you celebrating Ascension so early? And I was like, it's 40 days, guys. 40
Well,
days.
and-
It's right now.
By the way, everybody, we do have a guest on, so I'm not trying to take up the guest's time or anything, but I just want to say real quick because of that, I'm confused on that too because Exaudi Sunday, which is the Sunday after Ascension in the historic lectionary, it's actually one of my favorite Sundays to preach on because it's all about suffering and asking the question, why would the Lord ascend to heaven and kind of leave us to suffer in this way? And that it kind of revolves around that theme of, why the ascension is actually a benefit to us and how suffering can be, a good thing in our sanctification. So, it kind of transferring ascension to Exaudi Sunday is kind of it ruins the flow for me, I guess. But regardless, that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're actually here to talk about some other denominations, somewhat mainline Protestantism, and kind of the effects that has been going on in mainline Protestantism. So, because me and Fillmore, while we pretend to be experts on certain things, we are not experts on things like, statistics and declining denominations. We'll mention it from time to time, but we needed a guest to come on and talk about this wonderful topic. And this guest is probably the best one we could think of because his YouTube channel is all about being objective and being neutral and delivering what other denominations believe in a very straightforward way. And if you know who this is, awesome. If not, go subscribe to his channel. The links are in the description. Ready to Harvest. Sir, how are you doing?
I'm doing very good. Thanks for having me on.
All right. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. Should we call you, Ready to Harvest or Mr. Harvest or Harvester or just that YouTube guy?
Harvester.
That tends to be what happens, I notice, because I don't frequently mention my own name on my own YouTube channel. I have people just RTH or whatever. But my name is Joshua, and I do disclose at least that much about who I am. So you can call me Joshua, that's fine. Or if you forget Joshua, it's a really tough, difficult name to remember. You can just default back to Ready to Harvest, since that's how you've always known me by.
Okay. So, we've now had two Joshes on the show. So, do you ever?
Yeah, actually, I saw that other Joshua Sullivan,
Yep.
right? Is that his name? With the Ask the Pastor. Yeah, I've seen his stuff for quite a long time. And back one day, I didn't have as many subscribers as he did. So
Yeah, and well, now you're kind of rocking and rolling on the YouTube front and everything. What made you want to start this particular YouTube channel? Because the channel, was I kind of right? And it's kind of taking like the question of like what do denominations believe, or maybe like the things that are happening in the news of these denominations, like kind of in a neutral way. I hope I described that right. But what made you want to do something like that?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is. So I created my YouTube channel actually back in 2014 and created the name back then of Ready to Harvest just because I'm always the kind of guy who, if I want to have anything named, I want to make sure that the web address is available. So when I go to think of a name, I just go to a place where you can search domain names and see if it's there. So I was actually just sitting around typing names, and I was thinking of the Bible verse where it says, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white, all ready to harvest. And ready to harvest would be kind of neat. So I looked at readytoharvest.com is good. So I registered the domain name. Eventually created a YouTube channel, and I just put other stuff up there for a while, and mostly videos that I've deleted at this point. But I was interested in denominations and actually volunteered to teach a class on denominations and was asked to do so. So I produced some videos just for that. But while I was making them, I thought might as well make them good enough that somebody on YouTube might want to watch them. So I made about 12 videos, put them on the YouTube channel, kind of just sat on those for a good long time. And I wasn't assuming at that point that this was going to be the whole way my channel would go. But over a while, waited probably a year before I really did anything else seriously. People were just finding those and watching them, so I started making a few more, and then it just kind of took off, and people liked it, and I thought, this is my life now. But I loved doing it, so it's been really neat, being able to be a part and really learn a lot. I've always thought and experienced that I learn much more from teaching than from sitting in a class, and so it's been just as much, if probably more of a learning experience for me than even my viewers, because I learn a lot of things that I don't have the time to say in the videos. But I've loved that, being able to both do something that benefits others and also get an education at the same time.
Excellent, excellent. And as we were talking in the pre-show, um, this is actually, I mean, your channel's been extremely helpful, especially for guys like me and Phil who, we get questions as pastors like, well, what does this denomination believe? Or did you see this thing with the United Methodist Church in the news? And we're like, yeah, we're ready to harvest. Here's a perfect video for that. Like it really helps out for sure. And one of the things that excuse me if I don't know the deep lore of this stuff, but as far as I know, you never mention your own denomination or affiliation or anything like that in your videos, correct?
Yeah, there's one video where I just introduced myself and I kind of offhand mentioned it, but otherwise I try not to, because despite there should be no reason why. I mean, obviously I believe in something. Everybody believes in something, and so there should be no reason you'd assume somebody's less neutral if they tell you what they believe. I find people just not knowing that off the bat helps them kind of distance from even thinking about who I am and think about what I'm talking about. And hopefully they can stay in that frame of mind long enough to when they eventually, maybe find out a little bit more about me, they'd still say, he's a neutral guy, and that doesn't affect what I think. So
Interesting.
that's kind of the reason I've taken that approach.
And do you ever get any flack for that? Like, people in the comments, tell me your denomination or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have people asking, and I've stated I won't answer comments like that just because I don't want every video of mine that to like be the top comment where it's just debunking what I'm actually trying to do. But and I've also, most of the time those comments are not like angry, they're just curious. But I do occasionally in a video where I'll just present something neutrally, and they'll say, like a comment may say that they consider it cowardly or something, that I've not taken a position. And more than ever, more than in fact, probably a lot of people, I would gladly give my opinion, but that's not what I've determined to do with this channel. So maybe someday, I've said, maybe someday I will, and everybody will come back and look at all my old neutral videos, and they'll hate them because of who I've become. But right now, that's not what I'm planning on doing.
Well, I mean, again, it goes back to, I guess the purpose of the channel itself. And of course, I'm going to hijack the unbiased nature and say, as me and Phil Moore are Lutherans, we have a big understanding of like the vocation of certain things. Like, and I think maybe vocation of a YouTube channel may be a little bit like, I don't know, millennial or Gen Z, I guess, but still, like, that's the purpose of the YouTube channel, is to be neutral and just kind of present these facts and everything. So again, it's extremely helpful, and I've enjoyed it. Phil, do you have any comments on the YouTube channel? Like, do you like it? Do you not like it? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
Oh, I mean, I was the one who introduced it to you, if I remember correctly, right, Brandon? And the
Don't
first
you call
time
me
that
out
I
like
had
that.
seen
Don't
it.
you call me out like that on my own show.
Well, it was like I think it was over back in 2020, I think, or wait, no, early 2021 or late 2020, somewhere along those lines, I had this YouTube just suggested me this video that I think was talking about oh gosh, that Unitarians. Yeah, it was a Unitarian video, and then there the different kinds of Unitarian, and I was like, Unitarians have denominations. That's weird. Like, I thought that they were like, why would they need to? Like, what would they disagree with? Because they don't really need to disagree with anything. And then, Josh kind of explained that there are some Unitarians who still lean Christian, and then they were traditionally actually had always been leaning Christian, and it was lately that they, things like that. And when I was like, oh, huh, yeah, this is very interesting, and this is he covered a very obscure branch of Unitarians that is almost non-existent anymore, and so that's where I actually just dived into that channel, and I was like, well, if these Unitarians are in here and they're like almost like non-existent, why isn't the Eldana there?
Well,
So
shortly
I
after
was
that,
like,
he did
yeah.
do a video like mentioning us, or not us specifically, but the Eldona, which is our diocese.
Well, yeah, but like the
Yeah, my
Unitarian one had
Reformed
their own
Outliers video. I don't know if that's the one you're thinking of. Reformed Outliers, I do refer to you guys because of probably the one of the main reasons people actually get to know you is because of the whole objective justification question. So
Yep, yep.
right. So that's initially I made it a mission. I made it my mission. I have to contact this guy. He has to cover the Eldana because he's very unbiased. Like I want to hear it from him than any other pastor out there. I like So I emailed him, and then that happened. More or less. So that's my introduction to the channel.
More or
There you
less.
go.
I will say real quick before we dive into the main topic that I think one of my favorite videos is the video discussing the Salvation Army and what they believe, because I've my secular job, if anyone doesn't know, I'm a bivocational pastor, so my secular job is in social work, and a lot of times when you're in social work, you kind of have to engage with the Salvation Army. So I've engaged with a lot of people in the Salvation Army involved in it, and I would tell people like this is kind of what they believe, and they have these like military ranking systems and everything, and they would either be in disbelief or they would think I just didn't know what I was talking about, because they're like, no, the Salvation, they're just the thrift store. That's the thrift store, and they do like the ringing the bells and stuff. Like they're not a real anything, like they're just a charity organization. And then that video came out, and I was like, aha, see, there you go. And it doesn't matter how many times I pointed people to like resources, books, whatever the case may be. Even if I said like I got a friend that I work closely with in my secular job that's in the Salvation Army, I they would not believe me. But then I show them a YouTube video and they're like, oh yeah, I guess that's right. Yeah.
yeah, well, I'm really glad somebody enjoyed that video on Salvation Army because that was one of the longest videos that I've actually made, and I ended up changing the way I make videos after that because it was just a really difficult job for me to actually make it. I was like, wow, I've made this far too long, and so I actually produced a shorter video afterwards, like a 3-minute one, because I was like, people aren't going to watch this long one, and in general, most people didn't. But so I'm glad to hear that one was still useful to you.
Oh yeah, well it's been handy, and I always tell people, YouTube has a speed up feature. If you can't get through a long video, just double speed, and you get the same information, sort of. You know, but regardless, we gotta dive into the main topic. So the main topic is kind of a topic that, in some sense, has been kind of drilled into the ground. Like we hear it on secular news, we hear it on almost every single Christian source, this decline of mainline Protestantism. And of course we thought of you because you've covered this topic in certain areas, and even some of the splits that have come because of, in some sense, the somewhat of the decline. Maybe there's all sorts of different reasons why, but um first off, everybody knows that mainline Protestantism in America has been on the decline for some time. But what do you know if there's any like myths associated with that, like things people believe that are a part of the decline, but maybe you're not, or just myths that people talk about because they're, I guess it's kind of a hysterical
Sure.
topic to talk about in some circles.
Yeah, one of the things probably is a lot, you talk about it being in the news and things like that. A lot of people who are not particularly theologically inclined, they just think that Christianity is declining. And when you look at statistics of like percentage of people that identify them as Christian across the board, the numbers are going down, at least as a percentage of the population. But there is definitely a certain group, and you say mainline. Like I've talked to people who have been to Bible college, and you tell them mainline, some people don't even know what mainline means, and it's especially an American type of term too. So they think, okay, are you just talking about like mainstream churches, like all the big churches? And really, mainline used to be nearly synonymous with mainstream because the churches that we call the mainline were the ones that were just everybody followed them. But because of the decline, they've actually fallen to the periphery quite a bit. And so even though in some cases these mainline denominations are still larger than some of the other ones, their effect on society and the influence they have has just been falling off of a cliff. So that's part of it, is just the idea of who are we even talking about. And some of the among people who are aware of this whole story, some of the myths perhaps that they create about it are thinking, okay, so that means evangelicals or other groups, they're just fine, right? Like the main line's in declining, and so we're fine. We just keep doing what we're doing, and we're not going to experience the same effect. And really, statistics show that though there currently isn't a decline in some of the other more conservative churches to the same rate, the same trends that led to the decline of the main line might be hitting those groups too. And probably one other I would think of is, especially among people who are part of the main line, they think, okay, yeah, we're declining. It's going down. It's like a linear decline. And they don't realize that there's actually a cliff that they're nearing that's going to hit very soon. That if you want me to talk more about that, I can. So, kind of a myth they might hold is that it's just going to be a continuing linear decline. Like right now, our denomination, they may say, has 1.5 million people in it. Last year we had 1.6 million, so those numbers, they're going to go down by 100,000 each year, and maybe eventually it'll slow down a bit, and we'll just hang out at some lower number. But really, there's some bigger issues down the pipeline for people in part of the mainline denominations unless something changes.
So is it kind of hard to quantify, because in at least in my experience, at least from in terms of politically, a lot of these mainline denominations may even be seen as evangelical. Like I have no idea where some of the lines are drawn, like you were said. Like, and when we talk about mainline Protestant decline in America, it's like, you made the distinction between evangelical and mainline. Some people don't even make that distinction. So, yeah, is it hard to get like accurate statistics for
Can
this?
I
Yeah,
can
I
I
mean, yeah, go ahead.
put a little perspective in this, because like since I'm in another country, that term like just flies in a different direction altogether, because mainline here just means that non-Catholic churches that also have good-looking buildings, like and the non-mainline ones are the big mega churchy ones, and the non-Trinitarian ones. So for me, that's the thing. And the thing is, though, the mainline churches there had never been like exponentially big, because I'm in a predominantly Roman Catholic country. So they've been seen as what the Americans brought first. That's the mainline churches: Methodist, UCC, Brethren, Presbyterian, all that stuff, and of course Lutheranism. And then they formed this one organization, and that's what defined them as this, like, mainline thing. But if you were to ask a Filipino, what a mainline denomination was, no one would know what that is as well. They only understand, oh, it's the non-Roman Catholics that also wear vestments. That's a mainline denomination. But then you're like, what about the Baptists? We don't even consider them. It's a thing. Like, so yeah, it's interesting to see where the line actually is.
Yeah, and that is a problem. I actually made a video on the way that we define these terms and how they're pretty poor. For example, black churches, regardless of really anything else, are considered their own category. They're not normally categorized as normally white mainline and white evangelical, and those are mutually distinctive groups. and then the black churches are just another group. And it's like, why are we dividing it that way? Like, it's just a strange way to view churches and count the statistics. But I think one of the things people kind of get wrong on that question is that mainline is not just like an adjective that any group could kind of fall into. It There's some question over the origin of the term, but it's not synonymous with mainstream. So some actually say it was like the Philadelphia main line, and all these churches that were nearby this particular railroad. There's actually 7 main churches that they've called the 7 Sisters of Mainline Protestantism, and then a few others that have been added in. But you'd say, okay, so it's the historical old denominations. Well, Southern Baptists are a pretty old denomination, older than some of the other mainline ones, especially when you consider the mergers and splits. So, the United Methodist Church is much newer in its united form than the Southern Baptist Convention is, but Southern Baptist is categorized as evangelical, while mainline is not. So they don't consider it in there. So when we're talking about the mainline churches, the ones that I think of particularly, the United Methodist Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, Presbyterian Church USA, Episcopal Church, American Baptist Churches, United Church of Christ, and Disciples of Christ. Some people might add in Moravians, and then just other theologically liberal churches that appear, like the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship that split from the SBC, sometimes just get thrown in there too. So it's become synonymous with liberal churches, or at least churches that allow liberalism. So the United Methodist Church, there are more theologically conservative, to a point, churches that are in there, and even in the Presbyterian Church USA, and then the Reformed Church in America is recently divided as well, because it had, especially in the Midwest, a lot of their churches, the majority of churches in what was considered a mainline denomination were more conservative and evangelical. So the terminology does, and that's probably another thing you consider in that myth category, the idea that, okay, a lot of people say the mainline church is declining means that liberal churches are declining, but sometimes in these mainline denominations that are declining as a whole, it's just all the churches are declining. The liberal ones are declining, and the conservative ones, and then you do have to deal with the issue that there are declining churches that don't fit the mainline category as well. So the lines don't all run in the same direction, and this is one of the reasons why I've covered the topic a few times on my channel, is because I've discovered there's not a lot of easy ways for people to understand this topic, because you just read news articles and they don't tell the whole story, and it's hard to get your mind wrapped around it.
Oh yeah, that tends to be, at least in my experience, like, someone grabs a headline and they kind of run with it, and that's kind of been at least the way it is. I mean, for as long as I could remember. I mean, even back in the 90s, they were talking about the decline of, the churches and decline of Christianity, and Gen X was going to be the downfall of the church, and then it was the millennials that were going to be the downfall. And so it's kind of, is there a way to track this history? Like, where does the decline really start, if there's really a starting point for it, especially when everyone's just grabbing headlines?
Yeah, you're saying like the historical start of it, or is that what you're asking about? Like when it began, or what caused it?
Yeah, I mean, I know we probably can't point to one single cause or anything, but is there like a
Sure.
certain point where we can say, oh, this is definitely the beginning of the decline?
Well, the 1960s is when you see actual numerical decline, but there's really two kinds of decline, right? Your church is declining in some sense if it's becoming a smaller proportion of a growing country. So like the United States has, through most of its history, been growing. And so your church could actually be growing slower than the nation is growing, and so actually losing a percentage share. And so a lot of these, Christianity, a lot of these churches, when they started showing up, they would take more and more share of the population. And so they were growing within the population. And then they started slowing down to where they weren't actually losing numbers, but they were no longer keeping up and retaining the percentage. In the 1960s, they were actually at their peak. So they'd been slowing down the growth until it kind of hit a level in the 1960s, and so they were at the top, like, on top of the world, and so everything's going great, right? And then from there the decline hits. But to say it started in the 1960s, that's a huge problem, because if something causes your church to decline internally, you expect, okay, maybe the next generation, the children, won't attend. But that doesn't cause you to necessarily decline. If they never became members, for example, in churches that hold to believers' baptism, they would have never been counted in the first place. So you just don't see it for a while. So, and people get older and they don't necessarily leave, but then they don't bring anybody else in. So the 1960s is when the decline started actually hitting, but the roots are probably quite a bit earlier. Really, you could go all the way go back at least to the 1920s. I think things like the fundamentalist modernist controversy and some of the churches deciding maybe they weren't going to take a hard position on things. This is really a common mainline idea. We're not going to declare in our church service that Jesus didn't rise from the dead, or we're not going to deny the virgin birth. We're just going to stop talking about those things and maybe switch over to a social gospel focus and just entirely focus on social programs and bettering the world and kind of let the theology go to the side. So those kind of things. Now, does that by itself cause a denomination to decline? Well, if you're no longer trying to proselytize and bring people in, that's one thing. So that would cause decline. But also there's the question of how did people react to what was going on in the church and say, okay, do I want to be a part of this, or do I want to go to another church that's teaching the way I used to, or seems to still be theologically centered? And one other thing I'll mention is on that topic is sometimes evangelicals look at the mainline decline almost with a sense of glee, like that, oh, they're declining, and that's an indication that their theology is bad. But realize, and I think probably all of us have experienced people say something like this, like, oh, our church is growing because we do XYZ, whether it's seeker sensitive philosophy, or that they say, well, charismatic churches are growing, so we're charismatic. Just because you're growing doesn't mean you're doing it right. Maybe it means you're doing it wrong. And just because you're declining doesn't mean you're doing it right or wrong. So the glee sometimes can be misplaced, because they could point right back and say, did Jesus Christ, and everything he did always cause a growing church? Are all churches guaranteed to grow, or are the true churches likely to experience problems when the world is becoming more and more worldly? And if you're growing when the culture is going down, does that mean something's wrong with you? So there's that aspect to consider, that decline by itself doesn't necessarily indicate what your theology is and whether it's right or wrong, or whether your practice is right or wrong.
Exactly, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because in some sense, taking this into a theological context, Christians are supposed to be people of the truth, and I feel like a lot of times when people grab headlines, they're like, they'll use it to push whatever confirmation bias or agenda that they tend to have. And while it may feel good to kind of poke fun at some of these liberal denominations and say, oh, look at you, you're declining, it's not as black and white as what a lot of us may think. And if we're not careful, those same evangelicals that are giving the liberals a hard time can fall into the same traps if they're not careful. And I'm curious to hear, Fillmore, you being in a different country, as you said earlier, what does the headlines from America do in the Philippines, especially? Like, is there a aspect of we just don't care, or does, because America kind of brought the mainline denominations to the Philippines in some sense, is there some sort of connective tissue there, or how is it faring in the Philippines?
Well, for the people who have to care about it, they do. But again, I'm in a predominantly Roman Catholic country, so American denominations aren't really given highlight anywhere in the news here. Or if it does, it's very rarely that you hear about them. I mean, we have bigger non-Trinitarian churches that are more featured in the news in the Philippines than the quote unquote mainline ones. I guess for the typical mainline ones that are really big here, Methodist, Anglican, or Anglican leaning churches, and the Baptists, and those denominations, they do tend to see these things happening in the U.S., but they're very um, for lack of a better term, cocky about it. They're like, we're not affected by it. We're in a Christian country where a lot people still make a lot of kids. So for them, it's like, well, eventually we will be the ones to send missionaries to America, and it'll be our turn. That's the dynamic here with the mainline churches. They're very confident about themselves because they're growing, building more churches and all that stuff, and they're like they have this mentality. Oh, we're gonna be the ones to minister to them now. It's our turn. So initially, that's the dynamic here, because again, it's not as big of a deal here, because again, no one really talks about the mainline churches here besides their schools and stuff. In fact, they talk more about the school system of Protestants than anything else, because in the Philippines, Protestant education is seen as superior to every other uh, private school, because there seems to be a certain kind of prestige to be in an Americanized way of education than what we have, than what we have naturally here. So to answer the question more definitely, it's that, like, they do care about it, but in the more, we can fix it, we will be the ones to fix it kind of mentality than actually worry about, like, the declining numbers in America. In fact, some people are happy about it, because we get to be the ones to go there now and build churches in America, and then we can live in America. Yeah, things like that. But
Interesting.
yeah,
Now,
that's how it goes here.
Josh, I may be throwing you off with this question a little bit, but have you come across in your research, any indication as far as in other countries how America and the decline of the mainline Protestants in America has affected other countries, or have you seen any of that in your research, or have you not got there yet, or what's your take on that?
Yeah. Yeah, and speaking of other countries and kind of referring to what you've mentioned a couple times, Pastor Filmer, I was going to just say I recently completed a script, and probably in a few months the video will come out. But I was researching Members Church of God International, Ang Datindan, and Eli Soriano.
Oh my.
So that's going to be one of the videos that will come out. You'll probably find that one interesting.
I
And
felt
I've
I
done
will
Fillmore
watch.
Ignition and
clinch a little
Cristo
bit.
before on my channel.
I felt Fillmore clinch a little bit. And he's like, "Oh my, oh no, the Fillmore, you're familiar with this."
They're really big here, but go ahead, please go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as how it's affected, well, I think actually one of the biggest things that's affected is this United Methodist Church split, because United Methodists are a mainline denomination, and unlike some of the other American denominations, they retained one political structure worldwide. They're the United Methodist Church, and so if they plant a church in Africa, if they plant a church in South America, wherever they go, everybody there gets to come back and be represented in their denomination. And what's the problem with that? Nobody thought there was going to be any problem, and I personally don't view it as a problem. I think it was a very good thing to happen. Later on, what happens is they've planted churches in Africa. African churches have boomed. African churches are conservative, and so the American churches are basically, at least it seems, 3-1 in favor of allowing same-sex marriage. They go to have a general conference. All of the African delegates come in. Africans actually outnumber the U.S., and they vote down that proposition. And so the church is splitting basically because of this, because the Americans don't agree with the position. But they're the guys that started. The United Methodist Church was an American origin denomination, and so that's something where their mainline decline here in the U.S. has actually led to them being outvoted by more traditionalist conservative groups.
Interesting. So, I mean, so there is some, yeah, there's some effect to this outside of America, because again, that kind of definition of mainline American Protestantism seems to be the headline, but it does affect, and sometimes affects it in the way that I guess the mainline Protestants don't necessarily like, I guess, just based on that example. But that's just me reading into it. So is there one thing we could? I'm sure there's not one thing we can point to, as far as structure goes, if this is going to work out for them or not. You alluded to they're gonna hit a wall, or they're gonna go off a cliff. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing you see is you see numbers go down, and we look very denomination wide at that, and I've tracked those. So for example, I have some of these numbers for the Disciples of Christ, which are one of the hardest hit mainline groups in just the year 2008. That's not all that long ago. they had 679,000 members. And in 2016, 8 years later, they fell from 679,000 to 411,000. I mean, an absolutely massive decline to
Goodness.
happen in just 8 years. So you hear a number like that though, and it's like, okay, that's a big number, like, but still they have hundreds of thousands of people, so they're, it's not good for them, but their churches are okay, right? But the thing is, these denominations have sometimes thousands of churches, and the decline is spread across all of them. So when all of your churches were running 200 people and they declined to 180 people, it's like, okay, that's not good, but whatever. And then they declined to 160 people, and they declined. In many of these denominations, the numbers of individual churches are looking more like 20 people, 15 people. Once you go to a certain level, your churches just close. It doesn't matter if you have 20 people and in several thousand churches, those churches close, the big churches stay, and then the decline continues in them until they die off. So the problem that these groups are facing now is they have a ton of churches spread out, and so they look bigger than a lot of other denominations. Like, oh, we're huge because we have so many churches. But the churches don't have a lot of people in them, and having a big church can be actually quite a bit of an expense or even a liability. So they're going to run into problems because sometimes there's 12, Presbyterian churches in a city and they're all small. And so as far as if they were wanting to look for a solution to keep that from happening, churches need to merge together. This happened, talking internationally, the Church of Scotland, which by the way, just a couple days ago, maybe a week ago now at this point, voted to allow same-sex marriage, which tends to be something that happens in these declining mainline churches. But they announced something like maybe 6 months ago that they were forcibly having several of their congregations merged. They closed a ton in, I believe it was Edinburgh, and said, okay, we're going to close these 10 and you all just join these other churches and consolidate. And really that's what you have to do, because these churches are just going to decline into non-existence. You have to bunch up, and it may lead to actually full denominations really pushing merger, because if you have a little town, they've got a little Presbyterian church, a little mainline Lutheran church, a little mainline Methodist church, uh, most of those mainline churches don't really care about the particulars of the denominational differences in theology, which is why they already have full communion agreements where they can preach in each other's churches and share communion and things like that. So they just need to create a new united church and merge together, and that will buy them another half century maybe before they still continue to face the same decline.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing to point out too, because that's kind of, I mean, going back to the days of Samuel Simon Schmucker, there's always been a push in some sense for like a united Protestant church in America. So I mean, that wall could be them ending up doing what was considered theologically liberal in the 1800s. They're getting to a point to where that, with mergers and these altar pulpit fellowship agreements between the mainline, the Schmucker may get his wish after all these years. I don't know. I mean, people can say that's a good thing. I personally don't like it, but that, again, that's my personal opinion. But I mean, it's an interesting thing to think about for sure. We talked about the effect of it, outside of America, but is there any effect of it, like, say, outside of Protestantism? So, like, is the Roman Catholic Church affected by the same decline as, say, the mainline Protestant churches are?
Yeah, so I guess there's two ways you could discuss this. You could talk about how the mainline decline has affected Roman Catholics in the sense that other churches in the United States, other than them, are affecting people in their own church, but also just how declining tendencies also have affected the Roman Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has been not losing membership nearly as fast in the United States as the mainline churches have been, but some of that is because in the Catholic Church, you can believe extremely different from Catholic theology, or not even attend, or just be considered a member, and unless you do some very specific things, you're not going to be removed from the Catholic Church. So when you poll Catholics, for example, and ask them, what do you believe about transubstantiation? Do you believe that the body and blood of Christ are actually, that the bread and wine actually become the body and blood of Christ? in the United States, about 80% of them hold a more symbolic view. They don't believe that it becomes the body and blood of Christ, which is, completely opposite to Catholic dogma. And if you were to state that, if you were called in before your bishop and they said, okay, we want you to declare the doctrine of the church, you could actually be excommunicated for that. But just holding it and believing it and nobody really cares, these people aren't being removed. So the Catholic Church is not experiencing the same numerical decline right now, at least not obviously. A lot of people are leaving the churches, but not actually no longer identifying as Catholic. They might not attend, or at least not very often, and they don't really follow the church's teaching. There's been a longer time for the mainline churches to get even a level beyond. Like another generation has hit since mainline churches have went this way. And so at this point, because of that extra generational gap, they're declining for real. The next generation, if mom and dad, they said, oh, we were United Church of Christ, but they never attended and never did anything. The next generation, they just don't attend. And so that generation has already been hitting the mainline churches why they're declining. Some of the Catholics, the last generation around was the one that were fervent. The current generation that's there are the ones that identify as Catholic but don't actually attend. The next generation will be the one that actually formally leaves the church too. And you already do see this when you look at like Gen Z, some of these youngest groups, they tend to be very opposed to religion at all, because that tends to be what happens right now in society. If you're leaving a church, odds are, you're leaving to become a nun, N-O-N-E, nun, not a Catholic nun. They're declining too. But yeah, you're leaving to just not be part of anything. And so if that ever hits social media, those kind of people tend to be pretty anti-religion on the whole. Now, as one other thing to address the other side, the decline of mainline churches themselves, though, does also affect Catholics, because there are people in these mainline denominations, I think particularly of the Episcopal Church, who are actually, they are religious. They are fervent in their theology. They do care about theology, and they see their denomination becoming kind of the opposite of that. And so they flee, and one of the places they go is the Catholic Church. So there are actually higher numbers proportionately of mainline people exiting to become Catholic than historically has been the case.
Interesting. So going back to Fillmore, you are in a predominantly Roman Catholic country. So Roman Catholicism is, worldwide in some sense. So do you see some of those same problems of, people not attending mass or not holding to the church's teaching, and maybe that's part of the problem, or I guess I don't want to say problem, trying to stay neutral, because we have an excellent example of neutrality here on the show today, but it's hard for me to be neutral. But Fillmore, what's your experience in a Roman Catholic country as far as that's concerned?
Well, I'll explain it with the story that one of my seminary professors had told me. He said that a priest had talked to him. They were friendly with each other, and he said to the priest, I'm so jealous because you have 500, 600 people in your parish every single Sunday and every single day even, and I have 20 in mine. And then and then the priest said, tell me, those 20 people, how many are not going, or how many within all of your members are not going? You have 20. And they're like, no, 20, that's all of them. See, you have more coming to you. And he's like, why? Because those 500 people that go to mass every single Sunday or even every day, that's like you telling me that only one of the 20 people are going to service. Those 500 people are nothing. And if we are going to actually say that the Philippines is, 80 or sometimes even 95% Roman Catholic or 90% Roman Catholic, then statistically, if that were true and everyone was practicing, there wouldn't be enough churches in the Philippines. There could be 100 churches in every block. There could be a church in every block, and it would still all be full and like you can have like 10 services and it would still be full. But that's just not the case. If there's only like 500 people going to mass every day, and this parish is supposed to accommodate this whole city, or this whole village, or this whole like thing, then that would mean that that's like 5% of every Roman Catholic there, 2% of every Roman Catholic there. So I think that's what I'm getting at. Like many people here, even like Josh said, like people here say they're Roman Catholic, but they're not practicing, and they just don't want to say that they're not Roman Catholic anymore because they would get disowned by their parents. But what if they become parents? You know, well, would they still follow that value, those values of like taking religion somewhat seriously to the point where you know you just have to conform as a Roman Catholic, and that's the only important thing. And then yeah, these millennials, they become parents, and then their children, uh, their children aren't, they're not told to go to church anymore. They're not forced to go to church anymore. Their parents might go every Christmas, then their children don't. I've had experiences where like a kid would come to me, like 14, 15 year old, and he would say that he wants to be a Lutheran. I'm like, well, why? Well, because I've never really been in a church going family. But you're Roman Catholic, yes. So your mom's okay with this. My mom doesn't care. And when I heard that, you're like, oh, you're in that generation now where your mom doesn't care anymore, even if you leave. So we're at that point, and Josh is definitely right when he was talking about Gen Z. Most Gen Z people are reared by older millennials or younger Gen Xers, right? And and then for them, it's like they're not actually being told to go to church anymore. They're not being encouraged anymore. Whereas in my generation, when I was a kid, I would have many of my classmates would at least be on Sunday every single Sunday, even if they don't care. And then they grew up and they don't care, and then they have children, and then they don't care if their children went or not. At least at the very least, they would have their children baptized, but that's it. So it's happening here very much as well, especially within the Roman Catholic Church. And the thing is, though, the decline is more visible here in the predominantly Roman Catholic country, to the point where old people would go to church and say, "I thought it was a feast day. Where's all the people?"
Right, right.
So it's happening here.
Interesting. So,
Yeah.
um, Josh, do you have any opinion on whether Vatican II had anything to do with the decline, not just in Roman Catholicism, but maybe the mainline churches? Did Vatican II have effect? Because I see a lot of people say, Vatican II caused all the problems we have in the church, and while I tend to agree with some of that sentiment, is there like some effect that Vatican II has had on the decline at all that we can see or we can trace?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the ecumenism that was brought by both what actually happened at Vatican II and what was perceived to have happened, and just the door was open wider. It made it easier for people to convert, and really it was one of the signs um, that seemed to point to people putting down some walls that previously were there on their own theology. When you're fighting with somebody, you have to believe what you believe. But when it's like, okay, now we're just going to agree, then you can start to say, okay, now I don't have to focus so hard on defending my own theology, and do I even believe it? So yeah, there could have been those effects. It's hard to tell. I mean, sometimes things just happen at the right time. Vatican II, to some extent, may, obviously a Catholic wouldn't agree with the idea, but Vatican II, it may be less that Vatican II caused the things as much as it was time for that kind of thing to happen. Vatican II fit its time, and so the other things caused what took place there and the results in the Catholic Church. So it was, mid 1960s, timed with that decline. So you could obviously see why people might make a causation correlation connection. It's probably going to be really hard. There's so many factors, and obviously Vatican II is something that affects the worldwide Catholic Church, and not every place worldwide is experiencing the same effects from it. So I would say if we're going to try to look and point to a particular thing that maybe is, if somebody in 200 years were to look back on today and say, what was the thing that uh, really did in religious people? Why is Christianity in the place that it is today. And that's with the mindset, which I think is not unrealistic, that in 200 years Christianity will be uh, worse off than it is today. I would say they would probably look and say things like the internet and social media had a much larger effect than that. And we're still near the beginning of that. When you think of, okay, the internet's probably going to be something that's going to be around or something like it for the rest of human history. We're at the beginning of experiencing all that happened, but we've already seen huge effects on Christianity from the internet. For example, Jehovah's Witnesses, you can look at their chart of how they were growing, and you can look at when the internet became popular and see their chart immediately no longer experiencing the same level of growth. Because nowadays, if somebody decides they're going to convert, the first thing they do is they go and look it up online. And if you look up Jehovah's Witnesses online, you're mostly going to be hit with pretty negative information. And so people just don't convert. And I think it's very well the internet's actually the reason for that. But it's not just Jehovah's Witnesses. It's really everybody is experiencing, okay, the internet's the first place you go. And if the younger generation, the first place they are really learning about theology is from their favorite TikToker, that's going to have a huge effect on the church.
That's excellent. That's actually exactly where I would go with that. Um, I guess to sum it up, Vatican II is kind of like 80s hair metal. It was of its time.
Yeah, well, I could laugh at that, but that wouldn't be neutral. No, just
Oh
kidding.
my goodness! See, calling me out on my
Uh,
non-neutrality on the podcast.
I've got that experience pretending to be a neutral person, and you've got to work harder at it.
Yeah, I am horrible at being neutral. Like I kind of wear my opinions on my sleeve sometimes, but that is what it is. I'll try to work on it in the future. But going forward though, so many people have offered different, you know, stop the bleeding type of solutions and stuff like it. And I really don't know if there's even one thing. I mean, one thing that I can pull from this discussion is there's not really one thing that's doing in the churches in America, especially the mainline Protestant ones. Um, is there any merit to trying to discuss a stop the bleeding? This is what we got to do. You mentioned before, Josh, that some evangelicals are like, well, we're not in this situation because we evangelize this way or we have seeker sensitive programs. Like there's so many different solutions, quote unquote solutions. I mean, is that even a discussion to have, number one? And number two, is there a way to determine, is there a right solution, or does pragmatism just not need to be a part of the discussion? What are your thoughts?
Well, just so you asked the question, like, is it too far gone? Some churches will die. I mean, some churches in the main line and some whole denominations, yeah, like there's really little you could do at this point to change it. But there are others that there may be things that they could do to change it. When I think of denominations that are growing, and I've recently been studying and preparing for a video that I'll be putting out on churches in the UK, 80 different denominations there in the UK. The UK is a place that people often think of as a pretty post-Christian society, but there are churches that are growing, have experienced tremendous growth there. And it's not because the denomination has done something to push growth. It's because every individual minister is sold into the philosophy that they're pushing. They're trying to grow their congregation. They're not just letting it sit. For the mainline churches, what appears to be the assumption, and I think a lot of mainline people who study the mainline from within, their professors and even pastors would admit this was the case. The idea was religion is here, people are religious, we're the main line. If we drop a Presbyterian church in this city, the Presbyterians will show up and we just minister to them, and that's fine. And it worked for a while because that was the attitude. People grew up and, oh, our family's Presbyterian. And so you have generation after generation where the ministers just showed up and did the ministering, whatever it happened to be in their particular group, and things were okay. And there was never this culture of we always have to push to try to bring people in. We have to, you know, actually evaluate and say, are people gaining anything by being part of this church, or is it just, rote, empty religion where they don't really actually believe what's going on? And I'm not talking about whether it's liturgical or whether it's more contemporary, because that doesn't really determine whether your religion is rote or whether you have any value to it, because some of the more liturgical churches in the UK are actually the ones that are growing. So the issue tends to be that the mainline churches at this point, a lot of the ministers are older. Nobody wants to become a minister. The minister says, I just have to live out the next 15 years before I die, and as long as the church is giving me a pension, that's good, and they're not pushing to grow the church. So where's the young blood going to come in? Where are the people who are going to actually care enough about the theology of their church to try to stop it from dying? They just aren't there. So yeah, you could fix it if you could generate these people who would really care about the theology of their church and really push for it, and not just simply be content to sit in the large building and know that their college has a large endowment. So even when nobody actually believes the doctrine, the colleges will still be there, the seminaries will still be there. But I just see in many of these denominations that's not going to happen. Some of the most enthusiastic people have actually been the people who found a reason to disagree. So you see that in most cases it's the conservatives in these churches, as they are declining and they promote more liberal theology or enforce liberal theology instead of allowing it to be a broad, a large tent. The conservatives actually find something to fight about because the liberalism has gone too far, and that actually energizes them enough to break off, start their own denomination. Maybe some of those will grow, but actually the reality is, in some of these conservative break-off denominations, they'll fight for a while, they'll get out, maybe they'll take their building with them, and then they'll just sit down, and these conservative ones that came off the main line are going to die out just as fast, which will show that it's not exclusively a theological thing, it's also a mindset thing. So now the people aren't permanently attached to a particular denomination. I mean, maybe you'd say people tend to be Lutheran, but maybe they'd be happy to go to a different Lutheran denomination, or people tend to be one or the other. So if they jump ship and go somewhere else and they find the energy there, any one of these particular denominational streams can have a growing group within it. The hierarchical denomination itself, the United Methodist Church in the U.S. that's going to be left after the split, the Evangelical Lutheran Church, they're so entrenched that I expect these mainline groups to fall away, and they'll no longer be the largest ones. The real question is anybody going to come back in and replace their brand of theology with something more energetic? And when I say energetic, like people who actually care about what they're teaching and want to defend it.
Interesting. So I got a question for you, Fillmore. We're going to go on a tiny little bit of a bias on here. I know I'm trying to be neutral, but we're gonna stick our bias. If someone,
all right, I'm out of here.
No, we lost him. We lost him. We had one chance. We ruined it. No. If someone was to come to you as a pastor, Fillmore, and say, how am I? Yeah, how do I, quote unquote, grow the church? How am I going to help even as a layman? It seems like, you alluded to, parents rearing their children to be religious, but what would be like maybe the first thing to come to your mind, like to kind of offset this kind of trend? And we might not offset it enough to do anything that the world considers to be extravagant or anything like that, but is there something you could give advice to people to say, like, look, whatever the headline says, here's what you need to do?
Well, I would say is to actually believe it. Like, because as Josh has said, like the main problem is the mindset. And the reason why all of these churches are declining is because many of the members don't really believe in it. They just grew up there and they have some nostalgic connection to it, but when the mystique of that goes away, then what's really actually there? So anytime someone would come to me and they're like, I want to join this church, or something like that, I would say, well, you have to go to doctrine class. And even during doctrine class, I always ask by the end of the class, do you believe everything that I just said? And they would say yes. Yeah, I'm like, well, I'm going to hold you to that. And it's so important, the whole concept of it all, because like we were taught by the media and every mainstream media that, like, we believe in ourselves, we believe in all these things. But then when you believe only in yourself, you're not really standing for anything. And when you don't stand for anything, including your denomination, your church, and your confession and your beliefs, then the structure will fall eventually when enough people stop caring. So I would say, like, just care, just care. And how you express that will help in one way or another. And the more the bigger the care that you have, the more it will help. Now, how will that manifest? Do I have to force everybody to just go around and like, knock on each other's doors or something? No, because as Josh, again, as he addressed, people can just look it up on the internet and they would have their preconceived notions, regardless of how good you are in knocking on doors and thumping Bibles on people. No, it's the fact that you present yourself as there, you are there, and then people see you. Some people get interested, and even if I this is my personal belief, even if like the growth is slow within these new, smaller ones, which I am a part of, even if the growth is slow, when people join, they join. You know, when people join, they actually join, and they really understand what they're getting into. And it's not just because there's a church there and I want to go to a certain church, and then if I move away, then I'll go to another certain church. Of course, I have members like that as well that have kind of come and go for a while. But the thing is, though, at its core, I know that the people who actually care still outnumber those who don't. This is just not the same for the mainline denominations. Those who actually care are in these small groups thinking of schism. Some of them do, and then they form their own. But then what happens is, then they go to that mindset when they're comfortable. I'm in the situation where it's not comfortable because I don't have anyone looking out for me, because everybody that I'm in communion with is in the US. So I always tell them, well, this is the only church you have here. So, if you if you join this, you truly have to believe and know what this is all about, and not just go here just because you want to go here. Now, again, for the old people, they're in the mindset that, well, it's a church. A church is a church. But from what I see, there's hope within this Gen Z. Josh talked about the TikTok generation and all that stuff. Because you know what, Josh? Maybe sometimes I'm the TikTok star that they're following.
You got
You
lofty
know?
goals there, Phil.
I started a
Yeah, maybe.
TikTok a month ago or something, and I have videos that I'm ready to release on them when the time comes.
Nice.
Right? So I'm not saying that we should like be all progressive and just do whatever is new. It's the fact that, like, ministry in itself, and spreading the word out there in itself, has the means of spreading this word is still pretty much evolving. And we shouldn't go with anything that's new just for the gimmick of it. But use everything, YouTube, the internet, and then television and all that stuff before our time. All of these things can be used, and not in a will look cringe kind of way, but more of a make it look as normal as possible. And I think people appreciate that. I think children appreciate being treated as adults. I think teenagers most especially appreciate when they're treated as adults. I have teenage catechumens, and they'll bite tooth and nail to defend whatever I'm telling them, to the point where I'm scared sometimes, because they go on all comment sections and fight everybody, and I'm like, I'm so proud, but also I'm so scared. But yeah, there you go.
You had a mommy dearest moment, you know. You're just scared of your own
Yeah,
creation. So, all right. So, w-
yes, no wire hangers.
yeah, no wire hangers exactly. Okay, so let me throw it to Josh. Do you have any final thoughts, anything you want to leave as far as this topic is concerned? Of course, if anybody's interested in this topic, obviously they can go to your YouTube channel, and you have a bunch of videos, kind of covering the decline, and also the different, news coming out on the different, splits that are going on. And of course, unlike the bookcase behind me, you're actually going to be neutral. So that's a good source. Do you have any other sources that you would point people to?
Yeah, let me say, as far as neutrality goes, and I have a video just on the whole subject of neutral point of view. Neutrality is nice because people like you and I can come together and discuss these things, and we can focus on stuff that we all agree on, and we can have a discussion on it. But neither of us should or would want to be neutral in our own views, and so I'm the same way. But it allows me to discuss this particular topic. So if a topic was on something else, I mean, we could get out our internet swords and really go at it. But I enjoy being able to have the ability to provide a forum where, if I didn't present my videos as neutral, you guys probably would have never heard of them because my channel would still have 100 people watching. But as far as some final things about it, a couple things would be, people, when they're thinking about the mainline decline, think long term. What's been chipping away at the legitimacy of faith over the generations? So people like to think, oh, what right now, something happening at the second, but think long term. And the other one is think locally. Denominations aren't really declining; it's their congregations that are declining, right? The congregations decline, and that's why the denomination declines. Most of the people don't actually know hardly anything about the denominational structure. The members in the pews, they really don't know much about that. The thing that matters that's causing them to decline is the church, or even more, the families, the individual people in those churches. That's what's really driving the decline. And so, if there's going to be any kind of a solution, then think on those levels.
Excellent stuff. All right, so we're running out of time on the show, and I guess it's time for Fillmore's Fun Fact segment. We're going to give you our illustrious guest some quick fire Q&A.
We're going to break his neutrality.
We're going to break his neutrality.
With this
Coke or
Q&A.
Pepsi? That's it.
All right.
Okay, time for some fast facts about our special guest, Josh from Ready to Harvest. Are you ready, Josh?
I'm ready.
Ready to harvest?
I'm ready to harvest.
Ready to harvest.
Let's go.
Ready to harvest. Yes. All right. Are you into any kind of sports?
I've never played at any sports game. I was homeschooled. That's another fact about me. So I've never actually played in any official sports,
Kidding.
but I like to watch snooker online, if that's called a sport. And I enjoy watching that. And I've occasionally watched other stuff like Sepek Takraw. I like to watch weird stuff. So
Like professional wrestling?
All right.
Do you
That
watch
wasn't
professional
fast,
wrestling?
never seen a single match.
Oh man, that's my jam
Oh.
right there. Professional. I'm actually wearing a WrestleMania 6 shirt as we're talking.
Yeah, you can tell with Brandon. Next question. What do you spend your money most on?
Now I'm mostly spending it on my house and saving it to be able to buy a house in the crazy market that we have, or improve, because I have children and they're eventually going to need a bigger place than we're at. So that's a good one, right? Saving the money. Yeah.
Very sensible.
Very responsible. Yes. We should learn a lot from our special guest. What do you look for when you meet someone? What do you look at first when you meet someone new?
So like their nose or their eyes, or what do I look at first?
It's a fast
I'm not
fact.
sure.
You have to think fast.
Okay, I mean,
Go.
yeah, that's exactly what I do. When I see them, I just, whatever my natural inclinations are, I don't think I have much control over that. So, I probably pay more attention to the superficial things, like the Bible says I need to do less of that. You judge a book by its cover. So I look at the superficial things and I have to correct myself later.
Neutral and honest.
Yes.
I like it.
What is your favorite movie?
See, I'm not a movie person. Favorite movie. The first movie I ever saw on DVD is probably pretty obscure. It was called Race to Space. I still like to go back and watch that every so often. It's a kids movie, so.
Nice.
Interesting. I was gonna whisper. You just say Con Air and we can move on.
Yeah, if you listed off your top 20 movies, I probably have watched maybe one of them. I just don't watch movies.
Dog person or cat person?
The only pet our family ever had was a dog, and that was all right. Everybody's always been allergic to cats. My wife and I agreed. We said when we got married, we're never going to have any pets. So, dog is what you'll get, but not very dog.
Where would you prefer to go, and where wouldn't you prefer to go? As a place,
Yeah, I would. I've never been that interested in going and visiting Europe. So yeah, my wife is, but not I. And I've been to Southeast Asia. I've been to Africa. So I guess I need to visit Australia.
Australia. Oh yeah, I might be going there. Wait. Okay. Have you? Who would you rather be? Not who would you rather be. Who would you want to be if you could be that person, alive or dead?
Oh, be a person.
Be a
pretty
person,
abstract.
alive or dead. Yeah.
And I would try to say something spiritual like Jesus, but that actually sounds kind of blasphemous to say that. So I guess I'll go
Very neutral, Josh. Very neutral. I
go
want to be Jesus.
I'll go with Peter. I'll go with Peter, right? I mean, at least I have the
Oh.
keys, right?
Oh, nice.
Oh yeah, first pope. That's totally not neutral at all. Like, okay, well, I can't go for Jesus. I guess I'll go to second in command.
Absolutely.
What do you want written on your tombstone?
I like the dash to have the day I live, but there's never any date at the end because he's still living.
Oh, very, very, very Christian-y. Yes. Like
Or you could throw people off and have like a question mark, right? Like after that dash. So like the people look at it and wonder like, what does that mean? A question mark?
And how long are tombstones really going to be around? Do we have enough space on Earth for everybody to have their own burial plot?
Very true. Now I'm thinking that we should do that thing they're doing now where they're sending the ashes to space. That's gonna be a very fun ride in the resurrection. But yeah,
heaven anyway, right?
Yes. Okay. Last two questions. Okay. 3 tabs that are bookmarked on your browser right now. Top 3 tabs that are bookmarked on your browser right now. That's a tongue twister.
Okay, well, I have Chrome Remote Desktop. I use it. By the way, if you don't, I don't know if you guys use Chrome, but Chrome Remote Desktop is just amazing. It's free. So I click that all the time because I have a lot of computers and I remote into them. I have there's a free Settlers of Catan clone that you can play called Colonist that somebody recommended online, and that's bookmarked, and I've been playing that a little recently. I need to delete it because it's wasting my time. I'm supposed to be studying denominations. And what else? I mean, I use Gmail. That's on there. I don't have a bunch of other websites I go to all the time for news. I just go to Google News and see what the headlines are and then move on.
All right. Last question. When will you be our guest again on the bookcase behind me? Oh, okay.
Well, this was a good time. I mean, I wouldn't mind coming on again. You have to, find some. You don't want to have me be a regular guy on here and spoil your Lutheran mystique. So I guess that's up to our host, both of you.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know about mystique. Lutheran mystique. I mean,
Sounds a little too charismatic, doesn't it?
It sounds a little too charismatic.
Too agey.
Von Zinzendorf. All right. Well, that was awesome. We were ecstatic to have you on, and this was a good topic again for anybody listening. Go to Ready to Harvest YouTube channel. The link is going to be in the description, and study up on the different denominations. Study up on what they believe, if they're in decline, if they're not, and it's a great resource to have, not just for pastors, but for anyone that's just curious and wants the straight facts on these goings on in Christendom these days. So thank you again, Josh.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Thank you so much.
All right, so until next time, God bless.
Bye.
I'm not a good person. Ask anyone who knows